Good morning. How's everyone? Good. It's good to see the shining faces of the morning, and I have to say that I'm glad that I got this time slot because I really wanted to rush really fast to get here this morning and drag my children and family along to get here. But no, I was just discussing with Jack how it gets a little more difficult as you add new family members and new children to the repertoire of your home, and it's always tougher to get someplace. Back when I used to play football, my football coach used to tell me that for every freshman that you had starting on your team, you could at least dock a certain number of points. Well, for every child you add to your home, you can minus off 5 or 10 or sometimes 15 minutes off of your arrival time to any destination. But I'm glad to be here. We made it on time. And I appreciate the invitation that was given me to be here this morning. And I believe that this is a good lectureship, and the men that are speaking on it are good, and I appreciate Jack and all the work that he does. All of us have had, at certain times, these objects that we've had to carry. And some objects are absolutely awkward. And if you're like me, there is nothing in the world that I hate more than carrying an awkward object. Some objects may not be heavy, and you've probably said that before. If you're about to carry something, you've asked someone to help you carry something, and you say, I need you to help me carry this. And they say, well, is it heavy? You say, no, but it is awkward. I cannot get my hands around this thing, so I'm going to need your assistance in carrying it. So you have problems carrying certain objects, and certain objects are easier to carry than others. Now, all of us have moved, and in the past couple of years I've moved several times. And there are things in my house that I would really rather never move again. I just as soon light them a fire where they sit rather than move them anymore because of how awkward they really are to move. I have things in my house that do not weigh very much, but they are just difficult to move around. And for some reason, I keep having to move them. Now, some things are easier to carry than others. We try to box things up when you move or whatever you're doing to try to move a thing. You try to box them up. You go and you buy boxes or you go and find boxes at Walmart or your local grocery store, whatever it is. You try to box them up so you don't have to carry 25 individual tea lights or 31 cups or 50 plates or whatever it is individually in your hands to where your arms are loaded full and things are going to break and all of that. So you try to find boxes to help you carry those things, and the boxes that are the best are the ones with the handles on them. That's what I found. I go and I try to go to Walmart and I go to the meat section and they have these boxes that usually have handles on them. They're built well, they're strong, and you have the handles on the side so you can pack those things full of whatever you want when the wife's not looking, and you can just carry those things wherever you want to carry them because they have the handles. And normally those handles aren't going to break out and cause a problem. I love having handles on things. Take a mattress, for example. All of us have moved mattresses, right? You've had to move a mattress. And the worst thing about moving a mattress is that some of them have handles on the side and some of them don't. And the ones that don't, you have to have that mattress moving experience where you set it up on end and you pinch it like this. Because you can't grab it from the bottom because it'll never fit through the door. So you've got to pinch the mattress and you walk like this and you try to carry the mattress through the door. When they don't have handles, they're absolutely awkward. And so handles are a wonderful thing. The grocery stores, they've caught on to this. They no longer, the grocery store that I go to don't use them anymore. The paper sacks. We remember the paper grocery sacks that you used to have to carry with both arms. Or if you were real good, you could carry one in each arm like this. And they were rather awkward to carry, especially if you filled them rather full. So in carrying things, the grocery stores have figured out handles with the plastic sacks and makes it much more easy to carry those things. It's easy to take it with you when something has handles on it. I sat one morning and listened to a pastor on the radio for about 15 minutes. I didn't listen to this guy because he was interesting, he had a lot of great things to say, and I didn't listen to him because he was so informative. I listened to him and I continued to listen to him because for the life of me I could not figure out what this guy was talking about. I had no idea what his message entailed. And so I continued to listen. And maybe you've watched one of those movies where it just wasn't a good movie, but you continued to watch just to see what was going to happen. It really didn't have a plot, but you keep watching. This guy was the same way. He kept going on and on and on. Story after story, anecdote after anecdote. And I'm sitting there thinking to myself, fella, where's the gospel? He said nothing that I could grasp and take home with me. And I don't care who you're listening to. It doesn't matter if it's a pastor on the radio or what speaker it is. You're always listening so that you could grasp something, find some type of hold on the message that they're preaching or trying to get across. You would like to have something that you can take and make part of your spiritual house. Something that you can take and make part of your building. And so this guy just was not providing that for me. There was no handle attached to his lesson. And that got me to thinking, it had no purpose. But one of the most amazing things about the teachings of Jesus Christ is that no matter how you took it, his lessons always had a handle. You could always grasp what he was saying. People were always taking his words with them from the place from which he spoke. Some chose not to grab because the words seemed too heavy to carry. The object looked too awkward, so they wouldn't grasp. Some failed to see the whole due to prejudice. Others would grasp. They would lift and never really go anywhere. The object of every Bible teacher, and I know it's my objective, is to try my very best to create a handle every time I preach or teach so that something can be said that the audience can take with them when I'm finished. Something informative, something that is helpful, something from the gospel, from the Scriptures, something that my Lord said. Now, Jesus spoke to a tough crowd most of the time as he preached in his lessons. And as we see Jesus teaching, we see him speaking to these different crowds. And he didn't always get a positive response. And we like to think of his responses as positive for most of the time, but he didn't always get one. And in fact, most of the time, if you read the text, he didn't really get many positive responses at all. In fact, so many of the folks that he came across and taught, these individuals would rather have killed him than to listen to him. John chapter 5, verse 18, 7:1, 7:19, several different examples of Christ meeting opposition in the form of anger, resentment as he spoke his words. Noticing the conclusion of the Sermon on the Mount, this is the text that was given to me, coupled with the lesson that I have. Go over to Matthew chapter 7, and the very end of the Sermon on the Mount. Matthew chapter 7 and verse 28, beginning. Jesus has just finished speaking what we know as the greatest discourse to ever come through human lips. And as he finishes his saying, here is the reaction of the people, beginning in verse 28 of Matthew chapter 7. And it came to pass when Jesus had ended these sayings, the people were astonished at his doctrine. For he taught them as one having authority and not as the scribes. The people were astonished at his doctrine. That's the word we have in the King James Version, and in other versions they have the word amazed. They're amazed at his doctrine. Now, this word astonished, and if you've ever seen pictures or an artist's rendition or paintings or something of the Sermon on the Mount, and they picture Jesus and they paint him sitting on a rock, and then they paint the multitude, the people, sitting in front of him, and they all have smiles on their faces. This is such a wonderful sermon. They depict that they really enjoyed everything that Jesus was saying to them. What a wonderful lesson that he's preaching to us. But friends, is that really the way it went down? And thinking about the context, and really first thinking about the meaning of the word astonished here means, and this is Thayer's definition, properly to strike out, expel by a blow, drive out or away, or to cast off by a blow. Finally, he says it means to drive out. So when the text says that these people were astonished, it is not the case that as they walked away from that place, they were smiling and saying, "Oh, what a wonderful lesson. I sure appreciate the things that Jesus had to say." In fact, it was quite different. Now I want you to think about, imagine yourself under Roman rule. You're suffering persecution. You live in a village where it's been ransacked by Romans and their minions several times. Because you and someone in that particular community, it may not even been you, just someone in the particular community, refused to bow down to Roman rule, and so the entire village or community suffers. They come in, they ransack the village, they hang the young men from the trees by their necks, they kill the babies to teach you a lesson, to show you that you must obey the Romans. And then Jesus steps in and He says, "Love your enemies. Do good to them who persecute you and despitefully use you." What would your reaction have been? Would you have been smiling, saying, "Oh, what a wonderful lesson He preaches"? No, you would have been astonished in the sense that you would have been driven out. Friends, this lesson that He spoke wasn't so much a wonderful lesson to the ears of these people. It was more like a slap in the face, a wake-up call, something that they had not heard in the way that Jesus had spoken it. Now, I've heard several sermons preached where they say, Jesus preached a wonderful message, and these people, they responded to the things that He said. I am not denying that. They absolutely responded to the words of Jesus Christ. But it is not in the way that we often think. Look over just a few chapters in Matthew chapter 13. The same word is used in Matthew chapter 13. Beginning there in verse 53, "And it came to pass that when Jesus had finished these parables, He departed thence. And when He came to His own country, He taught them in their synagogue, insomuch they were astonished, and said, Whence hath this man this wisdom and these mighty works?" Notice their reaction. "Is this not a carpenter's son? Is this not mother called Mary, and his brethren James and Joseph, Simon and Judas? And his sisters, are they not with us, whence they hath this man all these things?" And they were offended at Him. They were offended in Him. That's the meaning of the word astonished, folks. They were driven out. They felt expelled by force by the words that Jesus was speaking. Now, in this situation, it was because of who He was. They just couldn't get it around their heads that this carpenter was going to tell them anything new. They knew who He was. You must do good to your enemies. What was so different about Jesus compared to the people that that was speaking with Him? With the Romans, and also another group that was prevalent at the time, of course, as you well know, were the Pharisees. And these had already demanded, these groups and other groups, the Sadducees, the Essenes, they were already demanding so many things of the surrounding people. The Romans, they said obey or else a lot of things, or else who knows what. The Jews, they would say, keep these 613 additional laws, or you will be marked a vile sinner for the rest of your life with whom no one will have contact. Now, we ourselves, we don't keep them, but you must keep these 613 additional laws. And here comes Jesus with a mass of principles, precepts, laws that these people had not even come close to observing. Not even close. He comes in and He preaches this lesson to them. And these people, these aren't things that they had been doing and saying, that's right. Jesus wasn't preaching to the choir, folks. These are things that these people needed to work on, as is the Sermon on the Mount something that we need to work on. And we need to add those precepts to our lives. Jesus' message was different, friends. Not in the sense that He offered less to do. Not in the sense that He gave fewer precepts. He did, but that's not the point. Jesus was different because He offered Himself to the cause. He offered Himself to the cause, to the lesson, to the sermon that He spoke. Many of the people would soon learn that Jesus was not in the religion business for Himself, as many of the people who spoke were, but for the salvation of mankind. In that day and time, there were, of course, many different rabbis, Jewish rabbis. And these rabbis, they would develop these forms or groups or masses of teachings among themselves, individually. And their rendition or their interpretation of any particular Scripture or the Word of God, as it were, would be called their yoke. Now, this particular rabbi's yoke was something that he held very dear. And it was something that he held at higher regard than any other rabbi's yoke. And his form of teaching or his set of teachings were revered by him and all of his followers. They also, by these yokes, would apply major burdens to the people they spoke to. Now, these people would follow, but the burdens were great. They couldn't keep the commands that these people were demanding. And so it's amazing to me that Jesus' message was different. Because He offered Himself to the cause. He said, "Come unto me, all ye that labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn of me, for my yoke is easy and my burden is light." He said, you'll find rest unto your souls. His yoke, His burdens were different. Why? Not because there weren't things to do, not because there weren't laws to keep and precepts to mind, but because Jesus said, you know what, you're going to trip, you're going to stumble, you're not going to keep all of these things perfectly, but when you do, I'm standing here. The Jews, the Pharisees, they weren't that way. They were hypocrites. When the people would mess up, when they would commit a sin, or they would go against one of the laws that were spoken by the Pharisees, the additional laws, they weren't there to pick them up and dust them off. But Jesus was giving them another opportunity. Never once did He say, don't worry about all that stuff I said on the mountain. I was just trying to make a point. He didn't say that. But the difference is that He didn't kick them when they were down. This, my friends, is why He came and suffered our penalty, so that we didn't have to. The Jews, they like to exact these things. The Pharisees, the Romans, they wanted to make people to make sure. They wanted to make sure that the people knew that they were the scum of the earth, really, to put it lightly. And they would tell them that, and their confidence would be driven into the dirt. We have someone doing that to us today. We may well have brethren doing that to us today, telling us that you're not good enough. You need to be more perfect. You need to get it more right. But the one that's really doing it the worst, of course, is Satan, and he's behind the scenes. He's sitting behind us saying, you are no good. You can't do it. That Sermon on the Mount, don't even try. You're not going to make all of those things. You can't keep all of those rules. You cannot please the Christ. He's going to be behind the scenes saying, you are no good. And when he says that, just agree with him and point to the cross. Because Jesus gave Himself to the cause. A spiritually desperate people were looking for a Messiah. Someone who would deliver them from this spiritual torture that they were under. And to this, Jesus answers to one woman, I that speak to thee am He. The words of Jesus Christ, we see Him teaching that He is the Messiah and He is there for us. Friends, He gave the ultimate handle that people could grasp in His words. At one point in time, John the Baptist was standing there, and I always get the picture of him standing there, and he just kind of notices Jesus walking toward him. He looks up and he casts his eyes forward, and there were people standing around him, and he looks and sees Jesus coming, and he says, behold, the Lamb of God that takes away the sin of the world. Here He comes. This man, his shoes, the latchets of his shoes, I'm not even worthy to unloose. He is greater than me. he gives Jesus all honor and glory. Jesus had some magnificent forms of teaching, and we don't have time to go through them all. If you look in the manuscript, and you'll find that I gave just a little bit of a insert of some of the forms of teachings that Jesus used. But one of the most amazing things at the beginning of the Sermon on the Mount was, as he began, before he gets into the Beatitudes, the text says, Jesus opened his mouth and taught them, saying. Concerning Jesus' teaching, and when we see it, friends, when Jesus opens his mouth, we'd better listen. He's got some wonderful things to say, and that's what I'm convinced is wrong with the world today. They don't listen to the Christ. They won't listen to the Christ. Jesus was a terrific teacher. He was a wonderful teacher, not in the sense that he was a great orator, that he had a big booming voice that people liked to listen to. His sermons weren't exactly as we would term them, the greatest of homiletical masterpieces, in the sense that he always had 3 points in a poem, an introduction and a conclusion and all of that. But what was it that drew the people in when he spoke? What is it that, for me, as when I read the words of Jesus some 2,000 years later, what is it that draws me in, that keeps me reading the New Testament over and over and over again? What is it about the words of Christ that does that? Look at John chapter 13, verse 34, please. John 13, verse 34, beginning. Jesus gives them a specific charge here. And within this charge, he terms it as something that's new. John 13:34, a new commandment I give unto you, that you love one another, as I have loved you, that you also love one another. By this shall all men know that you are my disciples, if you have love one to another. With this charge, in my mind, always came the obvious question, why was it new? Why is this charge new? It surely, God had expressed plenty of times that these individuals and that the people everywhere were to love one another. Leviticus chapter 19, verse 18 says it plainly, to love your neighbor. So the disciples, they would have surely known by this point their love for one another was imperative. Why did Jesus say that this old, well-known commandment was new? Why was it new? And this, friends, was the answer to me as to why I keep coming back. Why I continue to read it. Why His words are so timeless and magnificent. For the answer, go back just a little bit in the context. It gives us a wonderful insight as to why He was the greatest teacher. And this command comes on the heels of Jesus showing the greatest act of humility that had ever been acted out. He, being the master, the rabbi, the one that they were following, He bends down and He washes the feet of His disciples. Peter even refuses at one point, and Jesus says, sit down, I'm doing it. And He washes their feet as the greatest act of humility that had ever been done. He ties on the towel of service and shows them how and what it means to be humble. Now, with this scene of service fresh on their minds, remember this is in the same setting, and this scene of service is right there at the front at the front of their minds. He lays out this new commandment. But it was different than the ones that they had been given before. As Jews, these men as many of them being Jews, these men were under many new commandments, I've already discussed. They were given by Jewish sectarians and Jewish rabbis. And so when Jesus says, I give you a new commandment, they may have been going, oh, not another one. You're kidding me? Another commandment? We don't need any more. But He says, a new commandment I give to you. They would have been constantly reminded to do, keep. All of these laws, keep, do. Make sure that you wash your hands before you touch anything, before you eat. That's a law. I'm making it a law. And all of these laws that they continue to make and bind on the disciples, bind on the people that are around them. Do, keep, keep. They were familiar with this attitude. But Jesus' message was different. Instead of do, He said watch. Instead of do, keep, He said watch. Notice the stipulation in the text. It says, as I have loved you. Unlike the Jewish authorities and others who were merely gave the commands, Jesus has actually completed it before He gave it. A new commandment I give unto you, that you love one another as I have loved you. So that you love one another. Friends, that was going to be monumental to these people. You mean you've actually done it before you even told us to do it? Jesus called the Jews, the Pharisees, and the scribes hypocrites for a reason, folks. That they would give laws and they would exact large measures of precepts on these people, but they in no way kept them themselves. Not even close. And so the people would look in and look at these hypocrites. And not asking any questions, they would think to themselves, well, they don't do it, why should I have to? But Jesus, He did it before He even gave the commandment. As I have loved you, so that you love one another. This is why He was considered the greatest teacher who ever lived. This is why, friends, I believe that I continue to come back. His teachings were effective, timely, they were groundbreaking because He lived every single word of it. There's not a single person in this room, there's not a preacher who has ever lived that could raise their hand and say that. He lived every word of it. Now, as disciples, they can have the ultimate confidence. Those of us who read, we can have the ultimate confidence in following those teachings because the one who gave them practiced them. Peter, an apostle of Jesus, expressed it this way, for even hereunto you are called, because Christ also suffered for us, leaving us an example that we should follow in His steps. What an example. 1 Peter 2:21. He was a terrific teacher. But he was also, he also gave timeless words. Every word of Christ is precious. Every word is important. Nevertheless, in my mind, perhaps the greatest and most poignant and the most important words that He spoke were the ones concerning Himself. Because it is how we view Christ and the faith that we have in Him and who He is that makes or breaks us spiritually. True? We must have faith that He is Christ, that we must have faith in His deity if we wish to be pleasing to God. So the words that He spoke concerning Himself are so very important. The world is overloaded with various religious groups and different gods and different faiths that you can put your card on if you would like. But what's the difference? How does it stand out? Which one stands out as the greatest, as the one that we should follow? Well, friends, the only answer to that is the one with an approved and proven leader. Jesus Himself said, I am the way, the truth, and the life, and no man cometh unto the Father but by me. John 14:6. And I realize that's someone else's lesson coming up. But the way, the truth, the life, all of those are emphatic. There is no other way for life other than through the Christ. His message was not just one to show Him as a good teacher or a good man with weighty words. The teachings of Christ showed Him to be the only begotten Son of the true and living God. Now that is a message. You've probably spoken some messages in your life to your children. If you are a minister or a preacher, you've got in the pulpit and you've preached some messages that are very important. But friends, I assure you, you've never had to preach a lesson or teach anything to prove that you are the Son of God. And Jesus Christ, in every lesson that He spoke and every footstep that He took across this world, was setting out to do that very thing. So that you would believe that He was God's Son. After 6 days, Jesus takes Peter, James, and John on a particular occasion in his brother. He brings them into a high mountain apart, and was transfigured, the text says, before them. It says, his face did shine as the sun, and his raiment was white as the light. And behold, there appeared to them Moses, Elias, talking with him. Then answered Peter and said to Jesus, Lord, it is good for us to be here. And if thou wilt, let us make there 3 tabernacles, one for thee, one for Moses, and one for Elias. Notice, while he yet spake, behold, a bright cloud overshadowed them, and behold, the voice of the cloud, which said, This is my beloved Son, in whom I am well pleased. Hear ye him. Exclusively, folks. Matthew chapter 17, verses 1 through 5. And I always like the fact that Peter didn't even get anything out of his mouth, and God just kind of stopped him. Okay, before you go any further there, Moses and Elijah, they were important men. It's not as if they didn't deserve honor. But the point here was that they needed to give honor at this time to whom honor was due. Moses, Elijah, they had served their purpose in the kingdom of God. They had served what God had set out for them to do. Notice the emphasis that Apostle Peter was trying to place on Moses. He desired to make those 3 tabernacles. God, he stops him. It's not as if, friends, that some people just don't deserve honor. And I believe that there are many, I guess you could call them religious leaders, that were good people. They did some wonderful things. They were fascinating in the things that they believed. They were fascinating in the actions that they performed. But the problem is that none of them warrant being followed, because there was only one that warrants that. By his own admission, by the admission of the Father that created all things, Jesus is the only one to whom we can yield our allegiance. He is the Christ, the Son of the living God, and God the Father has given Him all authority. Matthew chapter 28, verse 18. In John chapter 12, verse 48, Jesus said, He that rejecteth me and receiveth not my words, hath one that judgeth him. My word shall judge him in the last day. Those words are so very important, and as I sit and I see Jesus teaching, and I try to read the New Testament as much as I possibly can, because there's really no substitute as far as study goes other than just sitting down and engulfing yourself and reading the book. And as I see Jesus teaching, I think about often His response to the Pharisees and the scribes. As a hen would gather her chicks under her wings, Jesus said that He was attempting to bring them in by the words that He spoke, but He said, Ye would not. I don't want to be that individual. I don't want the people who are listening to the words that I say, whether it be you or the people in Harrisonville or any time I get in the pulpit, to have that attitude, that they just won't obey. And so I'm going to continue to preach the words of Jesus Christ, because those words always have a handle. They always have something that you can grab and take home with you. Whether you agree with it, whether it's stepped on your toes, whether it's made you feel uncomfortable, you still took it home with you, and you've got to sit and think about what He said. We need to be His children. As we sit and listen to Jesus' teaching, we need to buy every word of it. Having small children, my son is now 5. My daughter is 3, and Levi, he has no idea what I'm saying most of the time, because he's only 6 months. But as my children, I speak to them, and from time to time I have to give them instruction. And you know, the most amazing thing about children is that they look at you, believing every word that you tell them. I can picture my son's eyes right now as he looks at me as I talk to him about things. He's asking a lot of crazy questions lately about rain and the stars and all of those types of things. And I have to give him these explanations. And it's never the case that he asks for an explanation and then, it's good enough, Dad, and he walks away. He'll sit there till I'm done. And he'll listen to everything I've got to say. He hangs on every word. And then as I'm finished, he acts like as if he wants more. I'm his dad. He realizes that he thinks that I have a lot of important things to say. We need to be His children in front of the Christ. Have a seat. Be still. Know that He is God. Listen to the things that He has said. We see Jesus teaching. I appreciate your attention this morning.